What is up, my boys? Welcome to a new episode of Mythos and Psyche Explained. We are going for a more heavy subject matter today. It's going to be about the book King, Warrior, Magician, and Lover. I'm going to try to do this in three parts, each 10 minutes. So the book is written by Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette. It's a book about boy psychology, about man psychology, and about developmental psychology. And it's based on four archetypes and their shadow forms. So, for example, we have the king on top, and then there's two shadow forms, the tyrant, active pole of the shadow, and the weakling, the passive pole. We have the warrior archetype, with on the active shadow pole the sadist, and on the passive pole the masochist. We have the archetype of the magician, with the active shadow pole being the puppeteer, and the passive pole being the floater. We have the archetype of the lover, with the addict as its active pole and the impotent one as its passive pole. Now we're talking about archetypes and shadows, so I thought it important to do a deep, in-depth analysis of what are archetypes and what is the shadow. This will be very important in the coming lectures, in the coming evolution of psychology anyway. So archetypes. Well, mammals are born with certain predispositions. You can call it blueprints, you can call it ancient images. It's what the Jungians can call it's the pool of the collective unconsciousness. You can see it on a way that all our ancestors who did not possess a certain intelligence in their development of their psyche after they were born, they didn't make it through evolution, which is why almost all human beings who follow the natural process and who are healthy will have these archetypes. You can compare it with, like, for example, the Greek pantheon. You have a storm god, you have a god of war, a goddess of love, a goddess of the hunt. Like, all these archetypes are blueprints on how to move through the world. So it's the nature and the nurture. It's like the mixture that makes us humans. We are born with a framework, a skeletal framework, and as we grow and develop and move and understand the world and try to manipulate the world and interact with others, interact with nature, we survive, we thrive, and we use these archetypes to build on. They are not isolated events. I mean, it is flowing, it is melting together, but we humans like to box things, put things in categories, so the authors of this book have made four archetypes. And they have this for the child, for the boy, and then as he transitions to a man, you have the four archetypes of masculinity, which they coined as the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover. So, what is an archetype? It's something that we use to understand and navigate through the world. It's something that determines our social life. For example, you have the archetype of the magician, which would be a doctor, would be a perfect example of that. You have the archetype of the warrior, a soldier, protector, a father, would be the exact archetype for that. Now, of course, every man who wants to be a police officer or a soldier is not only just a warrior and a soldier, he's also a father, he's a husband, he has hobbies, blah, blah, blah. So that's how we go. So, for example, archetypes could be synonymous with blueprints, with primordial images. It can be called fingerprints of the gods because although you and me would have a slightly different image of what a warrior is, like our fingerprints, we all have 5 fingers. So it's kind of similar in all of us. If you want a more complicated definition, you could say Archetypes are instinctual patterns and energetic outputs, genetically inherited, or you can say archetypes are innate, collective, psychic structures to map and thrive in our biotope. Another one would be archetypes are inborn seeds in the garden of our psyche to grow, to survive, and to thrive. It's similar in all of us humans, and I'll give you simple examples. Mother, the first caretaker, as we're infants, babies, it's the archetype of mother. Mother safe, mother feed, mother warmth. Or you have the archetype of the protector. It's the big scary male that's part of your tribe, father, who protects you against whatever. Or there's the archetype of hungry big cat. And if you don't fear the hungry big cat, you're probably going to be eaten by it, which is why it's innate. Ducklings, they hatch, and then when the mother's not there, they mistake the cat for their mother, which is called the process of imprinting. So they see the first thing and they say, this is mother, this is safe, and they follow the cat. But that's its own essay. Now, we ducklings sometimes mistake the cat for mama. We mistake mama for a dutiful wife and a loving mother. We mistake wife for being chaste and loyal, and we mistake the child for not being selfish, entitled, and promiscuous. The point is, we have these archetypes of divinity, of what is good, but the reality and humans are way more complex in the sense that it's hard to weigh up against that. So that is archetypes. Now, I also want to talk about the shadow, because this is way more vague. This is way more mythical and mystic. But I think I'm getting pretty close to whatever the answer is. So we all have a shadow, and it is pulling our strings behind the scenes immensely. And we can prove that, and it has been proven. So what is the shadow? Well, is it the human part versus the animal part? Is it thought versus instinct? Is it the persona, the social mask, the social facade versus our primal unseen desires? Is it light and good emotions, positive emotions, which is me, versus the dark, bad, heavy emotions, which would be the shadow's domain? Is it the conscious versus the unconscious? Is it what we see in the mirror, or reversed thing, or what we see on pictures, for example, because it's not us, it's the opposite of our image? Or is it that thing that makes us feel good when we see others suffer, when their misery loves company, right? The difference between us, the self, the ego, and the shadow, is it building and healing versus self-destruction and self-sabotage, which would be the domain of the shadow? Is it just bad thoughts in general towards ourselves, towards others? Is the shadow linked with violent sexual impulses, or is it more sneaky, deceitful, and predatory under the surface? Is the shadow the subpersonality in charge of protein acquisition, gang violence, and sexual conquest? All three things are basic traits of human nature, by the way, without which we wouldn't exist and we wouldn't have had this. Is the shadow things we consider slimy, dirty, wet, and prefer not to see? Is it just the bad emotions like frustration, resentment, jealousy, anger, loneliness? And then, of course, there's the question, shouldn't we use rage and venom processing to get that shit out? Well, we probably should. So, about the shadow, you have to think about these questions, because in the end, it is your own definition based on the arguments I gave, in which you have to decide, okay, this is the shadow part, this is not the shadow part, because it's not as simple as conscious and unconscious, human and animal. It's not that simple. Definitely not. So, back to the book. We're talking about boy psychology. So, according to Moore and Gillette, the modern society has produced two big issues with why boys are so fucked in this modern era. Their development. First of all, there's no rite of passage, and we've always had that. Now, the reason why boys need a rite of passage so badly, more than girls, is something we'll discuss later. But the point is, there is no rite of passage for boys. They remain stuck at a boyish level, and when you remain stuck for too long, things start going bad. The heart starts to become corrupted, and you miss the phases of life, and creates a lot of problems. The second reason is that there was, in the last 50, 60, 70 years, there was a huge attack on patriarchy and masculinity. Basically, the things that build the world and provided enough wealth for everybody and everything, and safety and prosperity. That's the evil, so we attacked patriarchy and masculinity, similar to an autoimmune disease. So we boys are eating ourselves up from the inside. I've always wanted to be king of the Lost Boys. So I'm now going to explore, let's finally get to the book that we're supposed to talk about. And I'm going to explore the boy archetypes and their bipolar dysfunctional psyche, which is the shadow. So it all starts with the divine child, as that is the first thing that we identify ourselves with. It's the baby child, the sacred child, the good child that's full of potential, full of power. But on the other hand, it's also extremely vulnerable and dependent of others. Now we are going to the yin yang, Ouroboros, the flow of life. It's like the dilemma, things that we can solve as humans, because things are not like in boxes, they're more like flowing over each other. So the divine child, when children go bad, what happens? Well, the divine child can split off into the high chair tyrant, which would be the active shadow pole. Everybody knows the child, thinks it's the center of the universe, claims all the attention, it's never good enough, the food isn't good, the love of his mother isn't good, he rejects it, but on the other hand, he needs it. So that causes a lot of pathologies and problems later in life. Now, the divine child can also be split into a passive pole, which is the weakling prince. We all know this helpless, fragile, indecisive child that's dull and doesn't have a lot of life in him. He's like waiting to be saved. We move on to the precocious child, the curious child, which is the child version of the magician. We can split this in the know-it-all trickster. This basically is a child that wants to dominate intellectually. Thinks it's smarter, thinks it's better, thinks it has the moral high ground. It's not physically the strongest, because else it would turn into a bully. But it's trickster, the child trickster. And then we have the other one, which is the dummy. It's numb, naivety, slowness, which is what we find in a lot of grown men today, and I myself am part of that problem. Then we go to the Oedipal child, which is the child version of the lover archetype. And we can split this child, this boy, into the mama's boy and the dreamer. Now, this child is connected with love, affection, sexuality, intersexual relationships, which have to be developed starting from childhood. Like, you can't expect a guy to be 20 and then start with affection and all that stuff. No. It starts when you're fucking born. So we have the mama's boy, and then we can think of, playboys and incels. Why? Because they're overstimulated. Like the playboy, they go for all the women, looking for the girl with the golden hair, the female tsar, the girl's gonna save them. But then they realize, oh, this is just a stupid girl. Okay, I've had the sex, let's move on to the next. Novelty, excitement. And then, of course, we have the incels, who are not attractive to a wider range of women. So they're not attractive to women, meaning they are not attractive to one woman, because although women say a lot of different things, and most of it is not real, in order to attract one woman, You need to be attractive to a big pool of women. And no woman wants a guy that's not wanted by other women. It's like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Why aren't other girls interested in you? No thanks. So, and then we have the dreamer, of course, which is the isolated and depressed boy sitting on a rock, thinking, feeling, but nothing happens. He is in a rich world of imagination and fantasy, but what does that mean? It means nothing, because it's not practical and nothing gets done. Then we go to the hero, which is according to the authors, and I do not agree with this, but it's their book. So the hero is the child version of the warrior, and is responsible for assertivity and individuation. It's like the fighter. And that's lacking in today's world as well, with a lot of guys that are either too aggressive or not aggressive enough. So we can change it to the bully. The bully goes for superiority and domination, but physical kind, and change to the trickster, it's physical. And then the hero can also be split into the passive pole, which would be the coward. And we all have a coward in us. Like every archetype I've mentioned is kind of in all of us. For some people it's 1%, for other people it's 20%. It's all, the domains are interchangeable and in flux. Yeah, the coward is just basically a man that does not stand up for himself. He's invaded emotionally, mentally, physically. He doesn't fight back. He lets other break into his house, take his stuff, take his women, and voila. That is, he doesn't do anything to stand up for his territory, his hierarchy, or his rights. And that is something that I can relate to. So this was an introduction to this book, Boy Psychology, Man Psychology, the book of Moore and Gillette's King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. To end this talk, I would like to talk about Mouse Paradise and the Behavioral Sink, which is a series of experiments made by John Calhoun from the 60s to the 70s, which is not to be confused with Rat Park, which was an experiment also done in the 70s to see if mice and rats can get addicted to cocaine and morphine if they have the choice. And it turns out that when rodents, when mammals have the choice to be social, they are way less sensitive to addiction. Like they choose clean water that's not laced with morphine to be doped. When they're social, they prefer to be sober and natural. It also, in the Rat Park experiment, the females were taking more drugs than the males. But we're talking about Mouse Paradise, which is a different research thing. This is done by John Calhoun. And basically was utopias with unlimited food and fun. And as the generations progressed, there was more and more safety, more food. Everything was in abundance, kind of like we have right now, or look at the height of the Roman days, the Roman Empire. Or look to England 300, 250 years ago. A rich empire, there's a lot of money, gods die or God dies, there's a lot of promiscuity, and people just start becoming self-destructive and self-sabotaging, and things go really bad. And then the barbarians are at the gates, and well, who's gonna deal with that? So in Mouse Paradise, after generations full of abundance, they observed a collapse in behavior of the rats and the mice. This includes refusal for courtship, which is what males kind of are doing right now. So you have a big pool of males who are not doing anything, and then a few males who are taking their personal harems. And there was also a lot of problematic female behavior, including not engaging in courtship and abandoning their young for other pursuits, such as, you know, eating, socializing, working. And we're talking about mice here, right? They don't work. The point is, the mice had eventually lost their social skills and care, and the colony died out. It just died out. They weren't, the generations shrinked, the children weren't taken care of anymore, they didn't learn the social skills, they didn't have the skills required to engage in the mating dance, and that is how the colony died out. That's the experiment of Mouse Paradise. So I have to quit here. I hope this was informative, and I'll see you in part 2 and part 3.